Hello and welcome to Bury Our Bones, a podcast that lives, breathes, dies, classic movies, not so classic movies, and everything in between. For the first time ever, I am joined by the wife herself, the posh to my Bex, the Goldie Hawn to my Kurt Russell, the wonderful Hannah Etherington. In today's episode, myself and Hannah focus on the only genre of film that could really convince Hannah to do an episode with Joel Schumacher's 2004 adaptation of The Phantom of the Opera. So sit back as we soar through the music of the night, try not to piss off Pink Floyd with a not-so-subtle homage, and finally masquerade through the musical classic without wondering why we have a phantom that has a Glaswegian accent.
Exclusively only on Orangutan Records, Jake Fratelli sings the classics. The Standard Outfit.
First and foremost, it's very, very, very nice to have on the wife, my partner in crime, Hannah Etherington. Obviously, I had to do a little bit of convincing to get you on the pod because obviously, you know, films aren't necessarily your forte, are they?
It's not that they're not my forte, it's just I have a habit of falling asleep in a lot of them.
Yeah, so we have to keep your interest peaked, and the only real way to do that from experience is to put a couple of songs in there.
Pretty much.
Basically, the film we needed to choose to get you on the pod had to be a musical.
Yeah.
And I think if you're going to start with a musical, you kind of have to start at what, for me anyway, is what I would call the ultimate musical. It's the one that I think if you're not into musicals, people will probably know a little bit about anyway.
They'll have heard of it, or they'll know of the story or the background or whatever. They know about it, and it's something it's come up through people's childhoods, and they've heard about it.
Which is obviously The Phantom of the Opera, as the intro has alluded to and suggested. So, I think we need to start off with the plot, because it's something that we always manage to forget. We get halfway through the episode and realise, actually, we haven't done the plot. So anybody who is wondering what this film is about is going, I don't know what it's about. So
and it's got a plot. It's not like some of the films you watch where God knows what the hell's happening.
Well, that felt like a little bit of a dig. Some of the films you watch.
Well, some of them you've made me watch. I'm like, what the hell is that?
Well, okay, I'll gloss over that slight dig there and read the plot. Deformed since birth, a bitter man known only as the Phantom lives in the sewers underneath the Paris Opera House. He falls in love with the obscure chorus singer Christine and privately tutors her while terrorising the rest of the Opera House and demanding Christine be given lead roles. Things get worse when Christine meets back up with her childhood acquaintance Raoul, and the two fall in love. The Phantom decides to kidnap her and imprison her with him in his lair. Raoul is now the only one who can stop him. So that's the plot, and that's got kind of what I would call the usual kind of things for this type of thing. Because, you know, at the end of the day, this is kind of this adaptation of The Phantom of the Opera is very much a love story. So it's got those kind of good versus evil kind of plot themes in there, and obviously it's got its romantic love interest. So it's got the things that a lot of people, if they're going to see this type of film, will want to see.
And then a load of singing as well, which may well turn a fair few people off. But yeah, it's, as you say, it's that quintessential. There's the old flame as such, so to speak, and then there's the new exciting entitress. That's not a word. You know, the daddy, I guess. Let's call him the daddy. And it's like, do I go with what I know, or do I go with this new exciting feature?
Yeah, there's an element of danger, isn't there, with this kind of, as you say, this new love interest known only as the Phantom. So what about your first love? So what was the first kind of thing you can remember about the Phantom of the Opera? Not necessarily the film, because obviously for most people it'll be, one of the other adaptations. So what's your first love?
But obviously my first love, as you say, I think you've alluded to before in a lot of your podcasts previously. My first love in general is musicals of all different realms. So I would have first seen The Phantom of the Opera as a stage show before it then got changed into a Hollywood film. So I remember the first thing I remember watching about the film, I think it was the fact that it was different enough from what I knew, but it was still the same. It was still the same story, and there's been really, really bad musical adaptations of some of Andrew Lloyd Webber's stuff, and this was one of the better ones, if not probably up there with the top 3. I will not mention some of the others that are dire, and I will never watch because they are dire. Cats with boobs. But yeah, this was a really good one, and I liked how they say it goes from the sort of the black and white to the colour, and it's nothing feels left out and forgotten about. Everything that is in the show is in the film. They've not messed around with it.
It's quite a faithful adaptation of the stage show, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. So especially, obviously, if you haven't seen the stage show, and so I apologise for talking about the stage show a lot, but if you haven't seen it, to you it would just be a good film, and it's got a good narrative, and you can see where the progression goes, and the sort of flitting. I was going to say flitting back and forward, but it's not, is it? It's flitting.
It definitely does. It flits back and forward.
Yeah,
which is where it kind of differs from the stage show, because obviously it's been a long time, because we went and saw this, what I'd say 10 odd years ago. I would say
probably that or longer. Yeah. It's been. I've seen it, I think, about 3 or 4 times. So I've seen it a lot more than you have, in lots of different iterations and stuff. So there is an element of I know it better than you do.
So I've only seen the stage show the once, and obviously one thing that is a little bit different from the stage show in the film is that, from my recollection, in the stage show there's just that one flashback at the whole thing is a flashback, and we almost forget that actually it's somebody's memory of what happened. And I think the film kind of, to its detriment in some ways, because I kind of like that idea of you kind of forget as the story progresses that it's a flashback, but the film kind of constantly reminds you, like periodically, it then goes back to.
But it's not a flashback.
It is
the bit at the beginning's a flash forward, because it's in the future, which I think is what potentially might confuse people in the film. Is that's in the future because Raoul is really
so he goes to the auction,
and I see what you're saying.
Everything essentially in the film, everything in colour is a flashback. It's him.
I get it. It's him remembering it, right? Okay, because my brain was going like, well, he's obviously at the auction at the beginning, and he sees Madame Giry and all of this, and he's old, and obviously Christine's not there anymore, she's passed, and it's his, like, this auction's come up because they found a load of stuff in the Paris Opera House, and he wants those bits, or at least one of those bits, back, because it's so sentimental, because it is that thing of Christine loved it, it was that piece of music, it was the monkey, all this sort of stuff, and then he wants that back. But yeah, my brain hadn't computed that he was then reminiscing about all of that. I for some reason I was just like, it's in the future, he's old, that's what. But then also I'm like, I
feel like that was definitely a penny drop moment for you.
That was.
I didn't think that would be a penny drop moment for you. I thought that was fairly obvious, but we gloss over that. So my sort of first love was probably way before, like, I met you and we got together. So I've always been intrigued by the story, but obviously before I met you, I wasn't really into musicals.
No, I forced him.
You didn't force me. But so the first time I saw somebody like in any, maybe not, obviously not on the stage show because I didn't see the stage show until I was with you, but see somebody portray the Phantom as obviously Michael Crawford.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously we've had many a discussion to the absolute detriment of our relationship that I cannot see really anybody else living up to Michael Crawford as the Phantom. I think his performance is like second to none. It's pretty much as good as you want to get in a musical as you can get. Having said that, I really like Gerard Butler's portrayal in a lot of ways. Like I like the fact he's not necessarily the greatest singer. I like the fact that it's a bit weird sometimes when he's singing. Like it almost adds to the torment of the character that he's not, on point. Because that's always a thing. I think a lot of people that aren't into musicals have a difficulty kind of adjusting to is, you've got all of these subplots and themes and all of these different things within various musicals. And it's almost a bit jarring to have them automatically then jump into song and be 100% pitch perfect all the time. So it's quite a big thing to kind of suspend your disbelief from. But with Gerard Butler, because he's not a classically trained singer and he's obviously coming at it from more of an acting point of view, much like Michael Crawford did, because he was an actor before he was a musical theatre performer. Obviously, Frank Spencer.
Betty.
A great comedy performance. So I think it's that kind of, that similar kind of aspect and approach to the character. So that's kind of where my first love was. I also liked the kind of like 80s synthy rock kind of ballad element to all of the music.
Yeah.
Like there's definitely if you never heard of the Phantom of the Opera, the musical, and you heard the music, immediately you'd go, oh, well, that was made in the 80s.
Yeah, you just know because it's got that. I don't know what the musical instruments are called, but I think you are right. There is an element of there's like synths or something, and I know it's like there's an organ, but there's something else behind the organ with the there's something else there. And it's like
it's that kind of mixture between like that kind of like early 19th century Gothic-esque, which is obviously where it's kind of in time frame where it's set.
Yeah,
but it has that at the time, obviously in the 80s, modern influence of those, as I say, those like synths, those kind of rocky guitars, that kind of a lot of effect pedal type thing,
which is interesting, as you say, when you have that kind of. You're in, as you say, a pre-19th century world and environment, and that's where this actual story's set. But it's like, I'm going to make this a little bit more modern because I'm going to, whack in like a whammy bar or something. Not a whammy bar, but
No, I guarantee you there will be a
whammy bar.
Yeah, I don't know what that was. But yeah, 100% a whammy bar in there somewhere. And it's interesting because obviously you mentioned just a minute ago about other Andrew Lloyd Webber adaptations, and I obviously don't know how much input he had on those, but in this one he obviously had quite strong input because you can see that influence kind of throughout. The fact that it is so closely faithful to the stage show is obviously to its benefit, because I think it. If you haven't seen the stage show, then obviously it's just is what it is. But the vast majority of the people coming to see this will have seen the stage show. That's why they're probably why they're buying the movie ticket. So departing from that thing that they already know would be a very kind of difficult thing to get on board with. So obviously having Andrew Lloyd Webber's influence, and we will kind of like ignore the fact that the main theme of the Phantom of the Opera is stolen from Pink Floyd. We gloss over that.
But what do you mean the main theme?
So the dun 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 dun. There's a Pink Floyd song that is literally that. Obviously, it's Pink Floyd and it's slightly different, but essentially, it's that same chord progression and that same riff. It's like when you hear it, it's almost like, how did you get away with it? And it's
there's a lot of that with yeah. As you say,
that's a different podcast episode.
I was going to say I don't want to get a lawsuit put on us, but yes, there's been many a documented instance of potential music phrases and tunes that are very similar to other people's that might have been popped into his work, but we'll gloss over that.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting to sort of look at like the figures of this one, because I think it's always slightly different when you're, as I said, you've got an already pre-existing kind of fan base, because that kind of means that generally speaking your tickets have sold themselves.
Yeah.
Obviously you can do the opposite way. So probably the easiest thing to relate it to at the moment is obviously the Wicked film version of the musical, which I didn't realise the one that's soon to be coming out is only part one.
Yeah, they're doing this whole
part one, part two,
which I'm not gonna lie, like I don't mind part one, part two for things like Marvel, DC, things where part one and part two is relevant, because at the end of the day, the musical of Wicked, you see it in two parts on the same day. We ain't going down the Cursed Child route and doing two completely separate shows in one day with both the two acts. But it's what I don't understand. So they're literally, if they do it like it is in the show, obviously we're going on a tangent to Wicked here, but they're going to get to Defying Gravity, and then we're then going to have to wait, what, year and a half, 2 years? And it's like, hang on a minute, what? Like, it's just I'm not looking forward to it, and I don't know whether I'll watch it, because I am very much a stage show lover of it, and I don't know. I don't know. It might be good, but I don't understand the whole part one, part two stuff with. Yeah, it's just not needed. They just want to make a buck, and I just don't think it's needed. And they will make a buck anyway, because it is so famous and people know it. Even if you don't like theatre, people know it and people have heard of it. People like Ariana Grande, and then the theatre people like Cynthia Erivo, and it's just I don't know. Why do they do this?
So I think that's part of the danger when you use an existing IP and something that you've already got a fan base for, is that if you go too far in certain directions, it can alienate your existing fan base, which is what I think has happened, obviously, with Wicked for you and for me a little bit. I know a lot of people are excited about it, but yeah. So I think, but going back to kind of like my original point is...
Yeah, sorry, I went on a bit of a tangent there.
That's perfectly fine. Tangents are welcome on this podcast. But it's that thing of, not that it's easier. I'm not going to say it's easier, because I don't think anything in movie making is easy. But it certainly gives you a bit of a leg up to be able to make money when something has already existed in pop culture where you can use that to kind of build your audience. And I think that's kind of evident when we do look at the figures, because this was made on a $70 million budget, which is quite a big budget for 2004, especially for a musical as well.
That's great. I'm not a money person, but that to me sounds like a lot. It's more than you'd expect.
I mean, you're getting into kind of summer blockbuster kind of territory. Now, I can imagine that a lot of that is, I don't know if it would be licensing, because obviously Andrew Lloyd Webber was like helping with it. But things like, when you're paying for recording, like for example, obviously you overdub things when you record films anyway, but if you think you've got to actually record songs, and you've got to hire a band, you've got to do all of those things,
studio time, or different studio time than just let's do they're walking on the grass, let's make it sound like they're walking on the grass studio time.
So whilst it's not necessarily more expensive, I think the expense is just slightly different and in different places. So I think if let's say this was just your standard horror film or a adaptation of that story without the music, I think you could probably half the budget, if not more, depending obviously, cast fees and stuff like that. So this was obviously released in January of 2005 for UK audiences, and I think it was December of 2004 for US audiences. So in its opening weekend, it made $4 million back, which on a $70 million budget, there must have been people going, we need more from this, because that isn't it's not a bad return, but for the amount of money they spent, they would have certainly have been hoping for a bit more, I would have thought.
Yeah, but you say based on the dates you said there for when it was released in the US and then the UK, they were trying to hit the Christmas release, weren't they? Especially for America, which I realise it's very different to how we celebrate sort of Christmas over here. Their Christmas Day and stuff, people go to the cinema on their Christmas Day, and it's very different to us. Everything's open, and we don't like shut the world down. So they were obviously expecting a much bigger return of sort of families and people going to see it, because it's that Christmas musical Hollywood spectacle that they like to bring out at Christmas time, that they think will put bums on seats. But
yeah, I think
I'm
it's
not sure why it didn't.
I can see it being, not your traditional kind of family film that you'd see at Christmas, but certainly an option for that. So it is quite surprising, especially considering what I was saying about existing fan bases. $4 million on a $70 million budget, when you've got a stage show which obviously has people coming in, day out, is quite surprising. Domestically, it didn't even break even, so it made $51 million.
Wow.
Just over $51 million back, and its domestic gross, which is again quite surprising. I suppose the only thing I can perhaps attribute that to is obviously the main kind of hub for musicals in the US is obviously Broadway, which is on the East Coast. So I don't know if musicals as a general kind of thing are more kind of east, like literally east and west. Like you've obviously got, LA, which is a hub for performance and theatre, and the same with, New York, but in the middle, I'm not sure if that's there.
Yeah, you're not geography, not my strong point, but you're not exactly going to get people in Texas or I don't know, like somewhere else that's rural, I guess, being like, "Oh, let's go see a musical," because it's not what they're brought up on. They're probably not going to have. They might do maybe one in the city, a large theatre that people could go to, that touring productions might come to, but you're probably only going to have literally like little churches or community theatres, and they ain't going to be putting on Phantom. Well, they might do, but it ain't going to be proper. It's going to be a bodge job, but
yeah, so it's quite surprising. I mean, obviously, worldwide is where it made, a good chunk of change. Worldwide, it was $154.6 million it made. So it's certainly made its budget back. I think once you account for things like marketing and things like that, it kind of sells itself. The marketing of the stage show and of previous adaptations kind of help it sell itself, as I said earlier. So 154 million is pretty good going, but I think domestically they would have probably expected a little bit more.
Yeah.
But that's, again, the figures are not to be sniffed at. So
no, for what it is, and to think, as you say, you've also got all of that revenue that's already come from X amount of years consistently running on Broadway, X amount of years consistently running in the West End. I don't know them off the top of my head, but it's a lot of years. So even with the cost of theatres, the cost of paying the performers, you're going to be making a fair bit of money back with the ticket prices you're charging in the West End and Broadway, absolutely.
And, just looking at kind of like the audience reception and the critics' reception, that may have something to do with it. I think obviously it can be quite, if you get a bad critical review fairly on in its release, that can spread like wildfire. And interestingly, like usually I would say audiences are a lot more, are a lot more harsh on things than critics are, especially in this instance where you've got a very kind of loyal and opinionated fan base.
Yeah.
But actually it's kind of the reverse here, whereby the critics didn't like this film, but fans did. So if we look at the kind of, the scores on Metacritic and Rotten Tomatoes and IMDb, so Metacritic gives it or critical score of 40 out of 100, and the universal user ratings are 8.2. So there's a big disparity between those. Looking at the Rotten Tomatoes scores, a 33% tomato meter for critics and 84% user rating.
But I think that stems back to the thing of the critics are looking at it as is it a good film? And I suppose they say you'd probably have to look at a few other musical to film adaptations, but it's probably very likely that the critics side of things, they never rate them very highly because they're not interested in it. The movie critics like movies that don't have singing or don't have, dancing and all this sort of stuff in it. Whereas the people that like the show, and even people that maybe don't like the show, they'll see it for that was a bit interesting. That was a bit different. And obviously Gerard Butler probably pulled in a fair whack of people because, I think that's probably why critics are they're in their critic head. They don't really like musicals, they like films. And you're going to hit it with the different kind of audience, I believe.
And it's interesting, I kind of almost disagree. I wonder how much of it is because of snobbery. We've had this discussion particularly with theatre. There is a bit of a theatre snobbery sometimes, and I wonder how much of that has translated to critics. So, the fact that you've got Gerard Butler, who isn't a classically trained singer or stage performer, as far as I'm aware, the fact that you've got people who aren't, that they aren't coming from your top drama schools in terms of musical theatre. I wonder how much of that has kind of translated into that critical rating, because that's always a bit of a thing, isn't it? When we go and see stage shows, one of my comments is that they're obviously all very, very talented, but they're kind of interchangeable. You can take somebody out and put somebody else in, and it doesn't really make much of a difference because they all have a very similar sounding voice.
Yeah.
Gerard Butler here sings in a way where you kind of know it's Gerard Butler, and that's not the norm in those kind of circles. And I just wonder how much that has kind of translated into, I'm not a fan of this adaptation of Phantom of the Opera because you can see Gerard Butler isn't a particularly well-trained singer and therefore it all falls down. I wonder how much of that there is in this.
But I know when I was watching it, I would have to do a bit more research to see if it is the case. I know people like Emmy Rossum, I'll get her name right, playing Christine. Yeah, I know she was singing, actually singing, but I never. I would always question whether Gerard Butler was actually singing or whether he was being dubbed a little bit. I don't know because I
think he 100% was singing. Obviously, I think with the film elements of it, you can do a lot post editing. If it's live on stage, you can't.
No,
that's the thing.
Very true, yeah.
I think that's that is probably what you can tell he's been obviously. I'm not going to say auto-tuned because I don't know if that's the right thing, but how many takes it took.
Yeah.
Do you know those kinds of things, which obviously stage performers, they get one take and that's what they have. So I think there's definitely an element of that there. As I say, I'm in the position of going, okay, well, what does that add to the character that he's not necessarily pitch perfect in every single thing, and he's not necessarily, projecting in the traditional way? To me, that adds an element to the Phantom character that shows this kind of tortured soul that, he's not. That's the way of expressing himself, and actually, if it's not, if there is a little bit of vocally scratchiness, it just adds to the emotions that he's kind of feeling, which I feel like sometimes is a little bit kind of lost. Like Emmy Rossum's performance is great, but there is an element sometimes where you're going, okay, you're feeling this big emotional thing, but you're performing, and it's again a criticism a little bit of stage performers.
Yeah, because isn't she
she's a classically trained opera
she's
singer.
come from that way round.
She's that's definitely why she's been given the role here.
Yeah.
She's doing essentially the heavy lifting in this, in those scenes. The same with kind of Patrick Wilson. He's classically trained as well.
I didn't know that.
Of course you know that. He was in the Full Monty musical.
Oh, yeah, of course he was.
Yeah, we literally spoke about this the other day.
We did, yeah. But my for some reason, through the whole of that film last night, I was going, who is he? What's his name?
Yeah,
because I could recognise his face, but I couldn't think who he was. But okay, yeah. So he's come from that route.
And it is interesting, watching a film, you can see who has and who hasn't. Obviously Simon Callow, classically trained that. Then you've got next to him Kieran Hines, who clearly isn't a trained singer. So it's that. But and I think sometimes, as I say, there is an element of snobbery that if you're not always on point or projecting in the right way or doing all of the things that you should be doing as a vocal performer, that like you would be on stage, there is an element that it's automatically bad. Whereas I kind of look at it from this thing of going, okay, well, it's not awful. How does that add to the character? In Kieran Hines' case in this, I think it adds to his kind of bumbliness. Is kind of he's a little bit of a caricature, and he's a bit of an idiot. He's a bit of a fool. It kind of adds to that a little bit, so I don't mind it.
They're both fools at the end of the day. They're out to make the biggest buck they can, and they'll do it in whichever way they deem fit. Hence why everything goes to pants, because they decide to disobey the Phantom's orders. So
exactly. So looking at the crew, so the people who made the film. So when I was doing my research for this, it was something I was really, really surprised at, is that this film is directed by Joel Schumacher, which that may not be a very common name for you to hear, but amongst moviegoers, that is a very, very well respected director. So he's directed things like St. Elmo's Fire, The Lost Boys, Flatliners. We'll gloss over Batman and Robin and Batman Forever because you ruined that franchise. But Joel Schumacher is a fantastic director, and it's very surprising for me anyway, because I wouldn't associate this with him, and I think that has really benefited the film that they have a film director. Yeah. It's not just, not being funny, it's not just Andrew Lloyd Webber's puppet.
Yeah.
I don't, not to sound, derogatory, but there is an element of the fact that we don't have a yes man means that actually on its own, it stands on its own 2 feet. It is a good film before it's a good adaptation of The Phantom and the Opera.
And it stops it being that thing where you're literally just going theatre stage show to film, straight transfer sort of thing, where everything that you do basically like a pro shot, you haven't done it like that. You've had extra little elements added in, and the use, as you say, of colour and black and white. You can't do that on stage. Yeah, you can, I suppose, do an element with lighting to a certain extent, but you're not going to get that same feeling and sort of that reminiscent, and say, to jump to the end, spoiler alert, like the bit right at the end where then the rose gets colour, but the rest of the around it was black and white, and it's more, as you say, filmy, and it's like sweeping shots up staircases and how they make the theatre come to life. All you get in the musical is the chandelier rises, and okay, I suppose in a way that makes the theatre then lights up, I suppose, a little bit, and everything comes to life. But literally progressing from black to white, let's have a bit of illumination, they turn the light on, turn the chandelier on, and then everything in the theatre comes to life. So the cobwebs disappear, the hustle and bustle comes back, because then you get all the performers and everything, and the stagehands, the costumiers, all getting ready for the rehearsals before they open for the new musical that they're new opera that they're doing. And it just it gives that sort of everything's come to life feeling without it just being a flick of a switch. It's just a bit more funky.
And I think having having a film director first in that role means that those things that can translate from stage to screen are there. It's not like those things are lost, because naturally they're two different mediums. Like, there are things you can do in film that you can't do in theatre, and vice versa. So, one of the things that when we watched this last night, I said to you, there's a couple of things here that I think are perfect, that are there's no fault with at all. And I said I wouldn't let you know what they were until we started recording. And you just mentioned them. So,
okay.
So literally towards the end of the film, where the monkey with the cymbals, I don't know what they call those things, but
it's a music box, isn't it?
That's it. Yeah. A monkey music box. Yeah. That being in black and white, when everything else is in colour, and then slowly the black and white sort of spreads across the film. That is perfect. And then when they kind of they do the reverse of that, when he's at Christine's grave and he sees the rose and everything is black and white, but the petals of the rose are red. It's almost very similar to that Schindler's List kind of thing, where you've got the red dress there. Like, that is so powerful. And actually, like, that's what I mean about filmmaking. Like, I don't think you would have that if you didn't have a good film director in that role. I think it would be lost. Like, they would do something and it might be all right, but that element there would completely be lost, because all they're trying to do is, for example, you can't really do black and white on stage.
No.
You can, the way you light things can make it look one way or the other, but you can't go black and white to colour, really.
No.
So having Joel Schumacher in that role is I think so valuable to the film. And I think as well, we mentioned Andrew Lloyd Webber. So obviously he had a hand in this. He was the producer and obviously the writer of the screenplay, along with Joel Schumacher. So they kind of sat down and worked together. And this actually was like in the makings from like the late 80s. So not too long after the play was in Broadway and in the West End. They were talking about a film.
Mind-blowing to me.
And I think the only reason why it wasn't is because Lloyd Webber was very much like, well, actually, let's have the stage show have a run first. Let's not run before we can walk.
Yeah, don't count your chickens before you've hatched. Yeah, that sort of element.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure that Joel Schumacher was like from the get-go, from as soon as they started thinking about a film, because at the time, so 89 when they started looking at this,
weren't even born.
Exactly. So, at that time, Joel Schumacher was things like St. Elmo's Fire, The Lost Boys, shortly after The Flatliners. 3 very, very good films under his belt, where you look at the filmmaking aspects and go, he's an accomplished director. I think perhaps if they were talking about it in the mid-90s, when you had Batman Forever and Batman and Robin, they may have gone, not so sure about this. But I think
it's funny because Ryan's talking about all these films and I've not seen any of them.
Yeah, and that's what we mean about you not necessarily being a film aficionado. This is more for the listeners, really. But I'm saying these films and you're going, oh, what's that about? I've never seen that.
No,
so
not a
there we go.
I've seen Scooby-Doo, though. That's a very good film.
Why Scooby-Doo?
Yeah.
That's not been mentioned at all here.
Well, brain tangent. I don't know.
Okay, Scooby-Doo. Well, I like that film too, to be fair, but it's got nothing to do with what we're talking about. So we'll move on very, very swiftly. So yeah, obviously Andrew Lloyd Webber produced and co-wrote the screenplay with Joel Schumacher, and it's obviously based on the old Gaston Leroux novel from the early 20s.
You're
which is essentially the same story, obviously just without music in there. And since that point, we've seen one of the old kind of Universal kind of films of the Phantom of the Opera. We've seen a version which we watched not so long ago with Robert Englund, Freddy Krueger, and a lot of this. I think this is the only adaptation.
Did I stay awake for that one?
Yes, you did.
Oh, blimey, that's the first.
Yeah. So it's the only adaptation that isn't solely rooted in horror. So all the others are very much horror films, and obviously this is more of a romance kind of, or more of a love story than anything else, which is obviously very, very different from its previous kind of iterations. So the editor of the film, or one of the editors of the film, was a guy called Terry Rawlins, who's worked on things like Alien, Chariots of Fire, Blade Runner, GoldenEye. So again, it kind of goes back to that thing of what I was saying. When you have accomplished filmmakers working on something, it makes that transition from stage or from wherever that particular thing is, if it's a novel or if it's a TV show, whatever it may be, it makes that transition not easier, but the transition works slightly better because you've got people who understand the medium that they're working in. And as I say, that editing thing of whether or not that was a Joel Schumacher choice or whether or not it was an editing choice by Terry Rawlins to go from black and white with the music box into colour and vice versa with the rose into black and white, I think is a really good example of great.
Oh, I think it probably would have been. It probably would have been an element of all three of them coming together, because the actual end of the film isn't the end of the stage show. The stage show ends on the part where Jennifer Ellison playing Meg Giry, finds the Phantom's mask next to the music box and goes and takes it away in the film, and then it then goes back to black and white when Raoul goes to Christine's grave, whereas actually in the musical you literally just end with Meg Giry holding up the Phantom's mask next to her face, and then it's a slow spotlight fade onto her, onto the mask, and then black. That's how it ends. And it's you kind of have that different. I suppose in a way, it almost kind of led to that. Not that there is a sequel, but it's that thing of like, well, the Phantom's still there. He's never gone, and that sort of that love and that passion, even though Christine's no longer here, never left. That's why, like, the rose is there, the ring's still there. He's always gonna love her. He's always gonna. She's his protege, and that's never gonna die, even though she's no longer there. And I think then that realization that Raoul has is like, well, okay, I may have got the girl, but I probably only had her sort of 75-25%, because there was always that lust and that desire, yeah, and enchantment of the Phantom that was almost running through her blood and her bones, which then kind of links back to, the rose gets colour again, because it's like, she's still a little bit alive through the Phantom, who is still around, and yeah.
That's what I mean, like those elements, we, as an audience member, we can add so much to, and I don't know, and as I say, I don't know how much of that would have been there in lesser hands. I think casting has, a big part to play here, which was kind of led by David Grinrod, who'd worked on other musicals. He seems to be a musical adaptation aficionado, working on things like Mamma Mia, 9, the 2017 Beauty and the Beast. Wait, you were in a production of 9.
Not the film, 9.
Yeah,
no.
You weren't sat next to Daniel Day-Lewis saying, "What are we doing now, Daniel?"
No, sat next door is that Antonio Oh no, was it Antonio Banderas?
It was Daniel Day-Lewis in the film.
Oh yeah. Oh, am I thinking of the new film?
Maybe, but in the 2009 version of 9, it's Daniel Day-Lewis.
Oh no, maybe I'm thinking of that one. Yeah. Oh, I'm completely wrong.
Yeah, I'm gonna say, don't challenge.
It's got Fergie in it.
What?
The 2009 one's got Fergie in it from the Black Eyed Peas.
I thought you meant Alex Ferguson. No. Then. Like what? An angry Scot, which we've already got in fun.
The Italian Fergie time. No.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, so that is Daniel Day-Lewis in that 2009 version. And lastly, the production designer was a guy called Anthony Pratt. He's worked on things like the 2007 Rome TV series and things like Excalibur. So
What's Excalibur?
It's an 80s kind of action film about the sword of Excalibur.
Fair enough.
So yeah, so up and down the board, you've got efficient, experienced filmmakers, which I think that echoes kind of what I was saying previously, really. And I think that's perhaps where Cats kind of fell down. You know, it's kind of become almost a bit of a running joke, isn't it, within musical circles that is, you know, a very, very bad adaptation because
why have the cats got boobs?
Well, I don't know, but it's that thing of going. I can't remember who directed it. I think it is a well-known director, but I don't know.
Oh, it's that dude who does stuff all the time.
I think it's Tom Hooper or something.
Yeah, that one, I think, off the top of my head.
Yeah, and I don't know how much control he had. But yeah, so I don't know how much, because I don't think he had done too much beforehand. I think he'd only done things like The Damned United. If I'm right in the person who's directed this, I could be wrong from memory. So I don't know how much experience he'd had. Whereas obviously Joel Schumacher in the early 2000s when this was being made, he's got a lot of films under his belt. He's very, very experienced. He knows what he's doing. And I think he's probably in a bit more of a position to push back a little bit on perhaps maybe Andrew Lloyd Webber's kind of wants and desires, who isn't necessarily working from a position of knowing how films are made and what works in film and what doesn't work in film. So I think that's probably why this adaptation works kind of a lot better, amongst other things, with the Cats remake. Adaptation.
He also did The King's Speech, Tom Hooper, and then went on to do the Les Mis.
Oh, okay. So that doesn't really make sense then, does it? Because the Les Mis is it's not a great adaptation.
It's all right, minus Russell Crowe.
Well, yeah.
Oh, and no, I don't really like Anne Hathaway.
But Anne Hathaway at the very least can sing.
And can
act and that. Whereas I think when you know, obviously you've got performers in. We're going to spend up speaking a lot about Cats, but when you've got performers in Cats who you go like, what are you doing?
Taylor Swift. Why is she in Cats?
Well, she's there because she can sing.
Yeah,
but it's an element. It's almost like it's a little bit like
Jason Derulo's in it.
Jason Derulo. Yeah, it's a very, very strange. I'm back more on topic on this Phantom adaptation. Yeah, I think it's probably just goes back to accomplished filmmakers. You know, if we look at the films that people have made, so the cinematographer, who I didn't even mention, I do apologise. So that's, you know, for Hannah's benefit more than anything else. The cinematographer is the guy behind the camera. He's the guy who kind of
I gathered that
decides a lot of the show. Well, that's not necessarily.
I'm not a complete imbecile.
Well, I just thought I'd double check. But he's worked on Gladiator, on Skyfall, on Hannibal from 2001. So he knows what he's doing. As I say, Terry Rawlins, Alien, Chariots of Fire, Blade Runner, GoldenEye, Anthony Pratt, Rome, Excalibur. These are all people who have worked on
epics, aren't they?
Epics,
really
big,
epic films.
Big productions with a lot of cast, which obviously, you know, you've got scenes in here like the masquerade dinner, the masquerade scene, which you've got a lot of cast members, a lot of extras. There's a lot of costume things going on. It's a big production element which has to kind of run smoothly. And I'm not saying it definitely ran smoothly, but when you've got people when you're in safe hands, those
people who know how to do big scenes like that, big crowd bits and work, and make it look grandiose.
Yeah, making it look grandiose makes it like,
sorry,
being in safe hands is such an important thing to have. I think it's one of those things where if you don't have that, things can very, very quickly look chaotic and feel like they didn't really know what they were doing. Where nothing in this film feels like that. Everything feels like they knew exactly what they were trying to achieve, and they achieved that thing. And I think, it kind of goes back down to the cast. And obviously Andrew Lloyd Webber would have had a hand in this, and is labeled, he should be given, you know, some element of the credit. But sometimes when you've got somebody coming in from a different world who is kind of overseeing their thing, that can almost be a bit of a detriment to it. You can very easily go, well, hang on a minute, this is the thing that I've created over here. We're now not doing that. We're doing something different. And actually, you need somebody like a Joel Schumacher to go, well, that may be great, Andrew, but we can't do that in film. That doesn't work. Everything on stage is different from being on film.
Yeah, you're almost kind of passing your baby across, aren't you? And going, you bring it up how you think it should be brought up. That's a really weird analogy, but you know what I mean, though. It's like you're giving someone the reins of the horse and going, ride with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But ride it how you want to.
And I think you have to be confident in the ability of the people that you're handing that over to say, I want you to create this, and I want to be happy with it, but I'm not skilled enough to be able to do that on my own. So therefore, I'm giving you a lot of responsibility. And without that trust, and to be fair, all we're talking about is how it appears. So it appears as though there was a lot of trust between the two. They could have been at each other's throats. I don't know.
So
but it doesn't come across on the celluloid. It's very much. It looks like, okay, well, I've seen the stage show. Yes, there are things that are different. Yes, there are things that aren't exactly the same. But it feels like the Phantom of the Opera.
Yeah,
it doesn't feel like
a completely different film. No.
It doesn't feel like Joel Schumacher's version. It feels very much like it's the same. It's the same story that's being told.
Absolutely.
In a strange sort of way, when obviously it is the same story literally being told. So shall we move on to things like the cast?
Oh, go on then.
Because I think this is a really, really good cast.
Yeah, I agree. There's elements where, not that the cast is bad, but yeah, we'll probably get to it.
Okay, that's interesting. So you'll have to tell me when. This is only kind of like the main people, so it's not going to go into all the sort of like smaller parts. So we have, as we mentioned previously, we've got Gerard Butler playing the Phantom. So people will probably recognise, if you're not familiar with the name, recognise Gerard Butler from things like 300, Law Abiding Citizen, P.S. I Love You. In the role of Christine, we have Emmy Rossum, as we mentioned earlier, who's worked on things like The Day After Tomorrow. She was in Shameless as well.
Oh, of course she was, the American version, yeah.
Yeah. We have Patrick Wilson playing Raoul, who for a lot of people is Night Owl in Watchmen, or he's the father from Insidious, or he's in The Conjuring as well.
That's where I recognise his face.
More recently, he's in Aquaman and things like that. So very, 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 very recognisable face. Playing Madame Geary, we have Miranda Richardson.
Please say the name right, Madame Geary.
I do apologise. Madame Geary is played by Miranda Richardson, who's worked on things like Empire of the Sun by Spielberg, The Crying Game, Sleepy Hollow. And actually, she's the only character in this, considering they're set in Paris, she's the only one who speaks with a French accent.
It's very true, yeah. And
everybody else,
and even then, there was
want.
Definitely a point where she dropped out.
Well, I'm not going to hold that against her, because at least she gave it a go.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to try and hold up a French accent for 2.5 hours. God.
We have, in the role of Carlotta, we have Minnie Driver, and I think Minnie Driver's great.
This is the thing. She is great at the acting side of it, and he's a good choice in terms of that. Like, she's got a funny face, and she's got
she's got a funny face. I like that.
No, but she's got a face that can do all of that, like really expressive eyebrows and mouth, and her accent is hilarious. Her miming, however, for the singing is god awful. And that, I think, leads me back to that. I don't think Minnie Driver's singing.
She's not.
No,
she's not
that's
singing.
got to be, as you say, dubbed. And as you say, she ain't going to be blooming operaing all over the place. It's bloody Minnie Driver. So, yeah, that was about the only bit that took me out of it, is that miming is atrocious. But, yeah, her acting is hilarious. And I think, yeah, she was a really good choice for Carlotta.
In the role of Fermin, we have Kieran Hines.
Mm-hmm.
And in the role of Andre, we have Simon Callow. And somebody who I haven't got on this list here is Jennifer Ellison, who, what's her character's name?
Meg Geary. She's
Geary.
Madame Geary's daughter.
Okay, yeah. She's the only one who feels really out of place for me.
Really?
Not because she's bad in it, but just because all I can hear is just a Scouse accent. I just expect her to be
The Phantom of the Opera.
Yeah, I just expect her to be like she's in Brookside. That's the only thing for me that kind of takes me out of it. And it's nothing she's doing. It's just purely. It's when you know somebody from something and you can't see them as anything else. All I can see her in is being in a. For anybody who's not from the UK, Brookside was like a 90s, early noughties soap opera set in Liverpool.
Bit like the world, Dallas, or like Where the World Ends and stuff for Americans. I think that's what they were called.
Yeah, sort of like Days of Our Lives and
That's
things like
it,
that.
Days of Our Lives. That's the one I wanted.
Yeah,
Couldn't think of it.
And as I say, like I think the cast here is on the whole a really good cast. Like obviously, you know, we mentioned Minnie Driver and her not being the singer vocally, but I think having her, regardless of whether or not she's singing, is a good choice because she can do all of that comedy. Like I think it's a very full on kind of story, and I think if you don't have those small elements of like light relief, you can get very bogged down in it. Now, don't get me wrong, this isn't, you know, the Killing Fields or anything like that, but it is very much woe is me in some elements of it. So you need that kind of light relief, and I think Minnie Driver provides that, as does the two owners of the theatres, Furman and Andre, Kieran Hines and Simon Callow, like those that are there for light relief as well. Yeah. And I think you need that throughout this.
Yeah, you need those characters, as you say, like they aren't the whole like woe is me thing, and just something to break away from the three main. I was going to say pragmatas. That's not the word.
Protagonists.
Protagonists. That's the word.
There's two protagonists and one antagonist, isn't there?
There we go. Yeah. Let's say big words.
I believe that the casting of Anthony Hopkins in the role of Dr. Fraser Crane will go down in history as one of the great casting mistakes of the last century. Who do we have on line one, Roz? On line one, we have Bill from Buffalo. He's just not feeling himself. Well, hello, Bill. I'm listening. Yes, Dr. Crane. I would just like to know, would you me? Would you me real hard?
So I think one of the things that you kind of have to get right with this is because it's the titular character, you have to get the Phantom right.
Yeah.
If you get the Phantom wrong, everything else falls apart because it's so ingrained. Well, it's as I say, the titular character.
Yeah, you can't have just, you know, Joe Bloggs from down the street. It needs to be someone with a bit of grandiose grandeur and an element of sort of, just in a way, someone that you want to kind of like feel for, and you want to, in a way, sort of fall in love with a little bit as well.
It's that thing of going. You have to believe all the elements of the character. So you can't necessarily have them be really, really good at the kind of being quite scary if you can't see those elements where he's loved. You know, and that those tender moments that he does have with Christine. You know, thinking back to the 89 version that we saw with Robert Englund, like obviously it's a different film, but he's obviously, you know, famous for playing Freddy Krueger, so you can see him very easily doing those scary bits and those bits where he is quite frightening.
Yeah.
But the bits where it fell down is that obviously it's different adaptations, so they weren't necessarily going for that. But in this version, he wouldn't be able to do those tender moments. Or,
God, no.
Well, no, actually, not that he wouldn't be able to do it, but it's harder to accept those tender moments. And I think Gerard Butler does a really, really good job of that balancing act of being, you know, frightening enough and menacing enough, but also having that tenderness where you're not completely scared of him. There's an element where you're intrigued about him.
You wanna know more about him and how he came to be. And I suppose you only really get a brief glimpse of that. You just get that bit where he gets not broken out, but he kills the bloke in the circus thing, and then Madame Giry hides him under the Paris Opera House, and they escape, and then that's how he escapes. But you only literally really see that bit. You don't then see, I don't know what, all those years between. So the point that you go from, okay, he was, I don't know what, like a 8 to 10-year-old boy when he got put in the basement of the Paris Opera House, but then you don't see him and how he lived and how he sort of became to be the Phantom at, I don't know what, 30, 35, I don't know how old the Phantom is, but
it allows the audience to kind of fill in the blanks, doesn't it?
How did he live? What did he do? How did he become this person that he is?
Yeah, and they always say that, the audience do most of the work with it's particularly when it comes to like horror and frightening and scary things, where it's more what isn't shown and what isn't suggested, and the audience fill in the blanks. That's kind of the thing here. I think with Gerard Butler, I always feel like he's coming at it from an acting point of view.
Absolutely.
So I mentioned it earlier with like his vocals, like he's not the best singer in the world, but I feel like all of his singing is almost like, I'm not saying he has done this, but I can see that he feels like he's made a choice. So okay, well, when I sing this particular bit here, I'm going to do this with my voice because I want to show that kind of emotion, which I don't think is always there when you're potentially a classically trained singer, where you're just worried about doing the best vocal performance. And I think that only kind of comes with perhaps not having that training, and therefore being able to be a bit more free with it and a bit more loose without being restricted to going, I have to do a really good vocal performance here.
Yeah, and I think there's so many different ways of singing those songs, and where you put like the inflections and the emotion and I'm going to sing a bit quieter here and then a bit louder here, and it's just it's a different way of coming at it, coming from an acting side first and the singing side. And I think that makes, because I know there was points where I was watching it and going, oh, that's sung differently than how Gerard Butler sung it when it's a musical theatre performer singing it. But actually some of the ways that he decided and the choices he made, I preferred versus the musical theatre performer doing it. So,
and obviously there's the biggest thing that you kind of had a little chuckle at when we were watching. During the music of the night, obviously I'm a bit of a stickler for a particular thing, so I'll just explain. So in the music of the night, when he does the Where You Want to Be, when he's performing or when he's singing those notes, one thing that I notice an awful lot, and I understand why they do it, because they're doing it on a regular basis, night after night, and it's a way of protecting their voices. But they always do what's called a step note, where it's not from one note to the other. They almost glide up the note. Yeah. Or they take a step note, so there's an extra note in between. And to Gerard Butler's credit, much like Michael Crawford, he doesn't take a step note. Now, obviously, it's been recorded, and you can edit, and you can do another take. So I appreciate that, but I have to level some respect at Gerard Butler for that, because it would have been very easy to take, in my head, and this is going to probably annoy a lot of people, take the easy way out. It's easy to take a step note. It takes some cojones to go straight from note to note on that. Yeah, it's one of those things where, for me, if I hear that decides whether or not the Phantom is a good Phantom or not. And I know that's ridiculous.
No, but we've literally watched like so many different iterations of the Phantom.
Like obviously there's that really random like cameo for musical theatre fans that Hannah you were very much like,
didn't even realise.
So Ramin, I
Ramin Karimloo.
Ramin Karimloo, who has played the Phantom, is a very well-known musical theatre performer in the West End and on Broadway. He's actually in here, strangely, but obviously at the time, very few people would have known who he is. He's gone on to play the Phantom, and obviously he's a very, very good has a very, very good, strong vocal performance. But I've heard him take a step note, and that to me is a little bit where I go, well, you're a classically trained singer, and people like Michael Crawford, who aren't, people like Gerard Butler, who aren't doing those. And obviously, that's one of those things where I kind of understand that I definitely am unreasonable in that. So
it's not unreasonable. I get it. I get where you're coming from, and we've had this argument about sort of other musical theatre-y things before as well.
Emphasis on the word argument.
But yes, we've, as you say, had discussions, shall we say, maybe not arguments, discussions, heated debates about how certain performers do sing, and coming from a more singing background rather than acting, step note doesn't bother me. Like, okay, yes, it is impressive when people don't have to take a step note, but it doesn't bother me either way. And I've got a horrible feeling that people aren't going to understand what the hell we're talking about with a step note. Do I need to do it
very briefly, or just be very careful of the mic?
Okay, I will move my head back. So if when we're talking about someone doing a step note, they kind of go bee, but when they just go straight into it, it's just like bee. So it's basically they do a pre-prep note. So a bit like a long jumper. They have to do like the hop, skip, and the jumpy jumps before they go wee.
That's a good analogy. I like that.
So you do like a pre-jump.
Yeah. And as I say, like, I do understand that I am being a little bit unreasonable there. It's just one of those things where I think I'm always trying to get back to that first feeling when I first saw Michael Crawford do it. And the fact that he done it in a certain way, it's almost like when you see somebody recast in a movie and you can't get that previous casting out of your mind. For some people, James Bond will always be Sean Connery. For some people, it will always be Roger Moore, for example, and you can't get that out of your mind. It's similar here, seeing Michael Crawford when he done it. And I think the biggest thing for me is, again, a little bit like what I was saying with Gerard Butler. He kind of does the same approach whereby, yes, he's singing, but he's using the singing as a way of telling the story from a point of view of character, which I don't think I see often enough in performance. So the biggest example I can give is on the line where he says, "Let your spirit start to soar." The note literally soars.
Yeah.
And I've never heard anybody do it quite to the same effect that Michael Crawford has, where his voice is like a shooting star. It soars across that note. And I've heard other people do it, and I can hear the training almost. I can hear the projection. I can hear that they're using their diaphragm in a particular way, meaning that they're projecting in a very good way, which is very, very impressive. But it's almost like it's lost. It's become almost produced. If
it's got an element of it's almost, in a way, it's had that pre-production element to it when actually it hasn't.
I think with musicals, I always have to kind of justify things in my head and going like, okay, I'm suspending my disbelief that these characters are breaking out into song. I'm able to do that, but what I'm not able to do is go, okay, they're breaking out into song, but how are they able to keep those notes so on point when they're feeling that emotion? How are they able to do this really impressive thing with their voice when actually they should be telling the story that the character is trying to tell? And I'm not saying that people on stage don't do that. They do that in different ways, and they do it very, very well. However, I think with the Phantom, I'm very much looking for a particular thing. And I think going back to Gerard Butler in this version, I'm not saying he's the best. I'm not saying he's better than anybody else who's done it on stage. I think he just, for me, it feels like he understands he understands what he's trying to do. He understands the job he has, and I think he does it very well. I think as I say, it'd be very easy to go, oh, he's the only one who's not the classically trained singer from the main three characters, and you can tell, and he's the weakest of the three. I don't feel like that. There obviously will be some people who do say that, but I don't feel like that. I feel like he's just adding character to his performance.
No, absolutely. And I agree on that one. And it would be very easy for me to turn around and like dump on it from a great height because it's coming from a different avenue than just having good vocals. So I think his vocals are, if he is actually singing all of that, I think his vocals are very, very good.
Which he is. Yeah. He is.
The only bit that kind of frustrates me, and I think it might just be an element of film makeup versus stage makeup, his phantom face under the mask is not as grotesque as it is in the West End show or the Broadway show.
Yeah, they're definitely trying to keep Gerard Butler there, aren't they?
Yeah, they're trying to make him still look fairly handsome, whereas literally you get the mask taken off of the person in the West End or Broadway show and their like hair comes off with it too, their nice wig, so then they're literally down to like this grey balding mess. They've got a bigger like puffy like lip on one side, and they look so much more grotesque in the actual musical version. And I think I know why that is. That's because you have to see that deformity from the back of the theatre. Whereas when it's up close personal on a film, it would almost be to the point of it's too detailed to be on a film screen, because you would almost be able to see the prosthetics that they've used to make him look extra grotesque.
I think it goes back to that phrase where we often say less is more, but in this instance, I don't think less is more. I think I thought the exact same thing. One of the things I noticed is that I think when he first gets the mask taken off, I think there's some element of CGI in there, which again is the age-old debate we have on this podcast about CGI versus practical effects. So it distracted me slightly, but yeah, I can still see Gerard Butler under there. And actually, you shouldn't really. You should see essentially that, you should see that torment and that trauma, which you don't really see. It feels very much
he had some weird, like bulbous, like boil on the side of his head.
Yeah, and actually, I think it changes about 7 different times. Yeah. Like, it's not consistent.
No.
So that's probably the only thing where I would say that actually they could have done more. They could have pushed it a bit further.
It was more Quasimodo than Phantom, is what I felt, because Quasimodo's got that weird, like, eye thing where it's like really open and you can almost kind of see the eyeball more because like the lid's lifted up and stuff, whereas that's not Phantom. It's more of he is just deformed with other facial elements and burns and scarring, and it's just but I get why they have to sort of minimalize it slightly.
So is there any other standouts from the cast that you'd like to kind of mention at all?
I think, as you said, Patrick Wilson is his name, isn't it?
Yeah, Patrick Wilson playing Raoul, yeah.
I think he is a very good Raoul because, to be honest, Raoul is a bit of a wet blanket. He is just there. He's the pretty boy.
He's the Prince Charming, isn't he? It's a bit of a nothing character.
Yeah, he's not really there for any real bits apart from to be the love interest and oh my goodness, he's back from when I knew him as a child and I still harbour those feelings. And
he's the knight in shining armour character, and I think in terms of character and backstory and meat on the bone, there isn't really anything there, and so you kind of have to have somebody who can kind of get away with that. And I think, as I say, Patrick Wilson does a pretty decent job there. I'm not going to say it's great because I don't think you could be great. There
isn't much wiggle room for anything more. It is what it is. It's you are the love interest. You are the I suppose in an element the hero of the story. And there's only so much hero vibe you can give when it isn't like an epic like war thing or you're fighting something really. It's like, oh well, the Phantom's managed to tie you up to a grate in his underground water cellar and like,
Well, I think there's an element with it with Raoul is that for a good chunk of the story, there's a question mark over whether the Phantom actually exists, doesn't it?
yeah.
So it's that almost that thing of, I think a lot of it goes back to people were questioning Christine's like essentially mental health there. They're going, is this in her mind? Is it, this isn't something that's actually happening. She's obviously overstressed because she's taking over from Carlotta. And I think, they don't go too much into that kind of down that kind of plot point, which reminds me actually one thing that I think the stage show does a lot better than the film did is obviously there's that element with the relationship between the Phantom and Christine is that the Phantom has like some sort of spell over Christine, isn't there?
Yes.
I think in the film that's lost a lot. Like at no point does it really feel like she's almost in a trance like thing. There are bits where she is a little bit, but whereas on the stage show, it's very obvious. He's literally, in that first, overture of the Phantom of the Opera, he's literally behind her, telling her to sing and guiding her,
that's
and
what
all
gets
of
me.
that. And it's almost like he's performing through her.
Yeah,
I didn't really get that here in the film. I think that was a little bit lost. There was certainly points where they kind of tried to do it, but it never felt like it was. It almost felt like it was more suggested rather than told. And you can kind of look at that either way. People may prefer that. I don't know. But that was kind of, I don't know if you were watching this for the first time and you didn't necessarily know the story. I don't know if you'd pick up that element from it. I think you would definitely pick it up if you went and saw the stage show. But here, that might, be something that you completely gloss over. So
I think so. I think because I've made a note of that. It was when he's like leading her down into his underground lair and you've got all the torch hands that like move as they're going down the pathway. So film versus stage show, obviously it's slightly different how you can make this work on stage, but they basically end up coming down from like, the way they do it in the stage show is they've got multiple different people dressed up as the Phantom and Christine, because they literally are going from one side of the stage on a big like platform and then they suddenly appear on another bit. But to actually walk that, you wouldn't get there in time in the amount of music they've got and stuff. So that bit, and so you'd only be able to really see that if you were probably closer, because they do it so well of like Christine and the Phantom will be sort of like facing the back, but they're walking and their body language is showing that she's being like enticed by him and almost dragged to his lair, but with an element of, and whereas the film it's just a bit, I don't know, it's not clear. And like the bit that really spun me out, and I've no idea why the hell is there a horse for all of like, I don't know, 20 feet? Like, why the hell does he chuck her on a horse?
I didn't really get that either. I think that whole sequence on the stage, I think obviously it's because of the way things are.
That's where the budget's the horse.
Well, yeah. I think in the stage show we're more kind of like astounded by the kind of magical elements of it, because you see obviously the way they do it is they have multiple people playing Christine and Phantom at that point, so they appear like they've almost transported from one place to the other. Obviously you're not necessarily going to get that in the film because montages exist. So I think that there's that element, but it definitely feels a lot less dreamlike. In the film it feels very much like they are just going to his lair rather than she's being possessed or she's being hypnotized and put in a trance by the Phantom. So I think that that's probably where the film kind of isn't quite as good as the stage show in that kind of regard. But back onto casting, would you like to know some potential castings for the film that were talked about prior to Gerard Butler and Emily Rosamund, Patrick Wilson, etc., etc.?
I would, because I'm very intrigued as to it works with who you have now. So I'm not sure who else they could.
It's always intriguing, isn't it, to
Hmm.
try and picture somebody different from what we know. So obviously, bearing in mind that this film was in development from about 89 through to when it was released, obviously. So bear that in mind. So some of the names, I'm going to throw them out at you, and you can tell me whether or not you think you can see it and whether or not you think it would be any good. So the first name, this is in the role of the Phantom, John Travolta.
No, that would have been absolutely atrocious.
Yeah, I cannot see that in the slightest.
No.
Yeah, that to me would be very much stunt casting, wouldn't it?
Oh God! And he wouldn't have been able to. Oh no.
Okay, so that didn't go down well.
No.
Antonio Banderas.
I can see it, but again, it leads me more back, and it probably is the accent thing. Mask of Zorro kind of level.
I think it's interesting because I've seen him. I don't know if he's been in it in a full production, but I know he's been in a concert version. I want to say in Argentina,
Probably,
or in Spain or somewhere. And he was quite. I mean, obviously, it's obviously slightly different production, but I can see it. I think it is obviously. I think he would be much better at the tender moments. I couldn't really see him in those frightening moments. I've never really seen Antonio Banderas in anything where I've gone, he's quite frightening.
No, because even in like a Vita film, he wasn't. His character of Shay, there wasn't really any point where he had to be sort of frightening or scary. No.
But certainly those tender moments, I can.
Yeah, he'd be great at the loviness.
How accurate this next name is, I don't know, but Meatloaf.
Okay, is that because he was there a point that he probably sung it in the 80s with someone?
He may have.
It might be.
I know. There's the obviously the video to "I Would Do Anything for Love."
That's very
it's more Beauty and the Beast-esque, isn't it? But it's very similar in kind of tone of, you know, somebody who's disfigured, who doesn't feel like they can be loved, etc., etc. So, but I honestly cannot see that in the slightest.
And I think, and I just say there is an element of the Phantom that you do have to be able, and it's a horrible thing to say, but there is an element of when he's got that mask on and you can't, I suppose, see the disfigurement, he does have to have an element of you are attracted to him, and he does have to be, I suppose, a stereotypically good-looking person. And for some people out there, Meatloaf may well get your loins going, but no.
Yeah, that's one that I can't see.
No.
I quite like this next name, actually, Heath Ledger.
That could have been very interesting.
I think, obviously, when we say these castings, we're looking at it more from a character point of view, because until you hear them sing, you don't necessarily know. I've not heard Heath Ledger sing, if he ever has. So that's a bit of a difficult one. But yeah, I could see Heath Ledger in that kind of role.
But it's interesting based on because when this film came out in
2004.
2004. So was this before things like A Knight's Tale?
So this was after A Knight's Tale.
Okay.
This would have been 4 years before The Dark Knight.
Okay. And Brokeback Mountain?
Brokeback Mountain was 2005. So
okay,
a similar sort of time.
So yeah, because that I think that's where I'm coming from with it. Is I can almost see Heath more in it as his kind of when he was Joker age and Joker level of acting, versus Knight's Tale, Brokeback Mountain level of acting.
Yeah, okay.
If it was Knight's Tale Heath Ledger, I would say he's more Raoul than.
Yeah, that's a very good point, actually. I can see him as a Raoul. Yeah. And actually, having said that, I haven't heard Heath Ledger sing. That's a total lie, because he's in 10 Things I Hate About You.
Yeah, and he does sing, doesn't he?
Yeah, so absolutely. And that probably is where the link comes from. Another name, Matthew McConaughey.
All right. No.
I don't see how you get past that accent.
No, you just
I've never
can't.
seen Matthew McConaughey in anything where he hasn't had that accent. So how do you get past that? You know, I can't see the Phantom having that accent.
No, it just doesn't work.
Doesn't work at all, does it?
He could probably play one of the owners of the theatre with that accent, or even Carlotta's husband, lover, whatever the hell he is.
Yeah,
But
I'll be
no.
honest, I just cannot see it.
No.
So in the role of Christine,
Mm-hmm.
we have names such as Keira Knightley.
No, she can be a very good. Well, she is a very good actress. I'm not gonna, but yeah,
Very good might be a bit of a stretch. She's all right.
Sorry, no lawsuit.
There's not going to be a lawsuit for your opinion.
Oh, okay.
Well, I don't know actually.
Exactly. Say anything anymore.
Another name, Charlotte Church.
Again, yeah.
Obviously, she can sing it.
Yeah, she can
That's
sing
probably
it, and
where the name comes from.
And to be honest, it's an element of probably Andrew turning around and being like, "Oh, that's a younger Sarah Brightman." Like,
yeah, that's a very good point.
It's like that's me.
Point.
That's my wife. Whether they were still together at 2004, I don't know. But yeah, it is that thing of it's that angelic Welsh songstress. Yeah, nah, she ain't got the acting chops for it.
Yeah, well, this is kind of the opposite now. So acting chops, but not necessarily the vocal chops. Is Kate Winslet?
Okay,
I can see her very easily doing the character. But I know she had that song that she released. That was from a Disney movie.
Oh, I don't know what that is.
I can't think what it's called, but yeah, she has released a song.
Oh, okay.
But this is an operatic performance. If you can't sing opera, again, the story doesn't really work. She's supposed to replace a really proficient opera singer, so it doesn't really work if you can't sing opera.
No.
So you've kind of, and I think it's interesting because I think whoever you cast as the Phantom kind of informs a little bit who you cast as the Christine character, because one of the elements that I read about actually, where they were concerned about Gerard Butler because they didn't think he was old enough. So he was in his mid-30s at the time, and they didn't think he was old enough to have that kind of that power or that but actually it works because Emmy Rossum is really quite young. I think she was 18, 19 at the
she's
time.
like really young.
So it does kind of work. Obviously, I think in traditional terms, I think the Phantom is what I presume to be kind of in his late 40s, 50s, and then Christine is in her early 20s, so it kind of still works.
Yeah,
but it very much does inform who you have in either one. Another name which we spoke about earlier with the Les Mis connection, but Anne Hathaway.
Yeah, again, I think I don't know what it is, and I think this is to Emmy Rossum's credit. She is this sort of like you can see her getting enticed by someone like this, or someone. She has that naivety about her, whereas I think, and it might just be because of parts that Anne Hathaway has played, she's got a bit too much grit behind her, and I can't see her just being this little waif and stray of like, I'm just gonna.
It's a very innocent kind of character who is almost, I suppose, corrupted. If that's the right word.
Yeah, I would say, the
Catherine Zeta-Jones.
Nah. Well, actually,
well, she done Chicago around the same sort of time.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to think.
Which is why she actually didn't end up.
No, she went for that one, didn't she?
Yeah,
and she was preggers.
So, yeah, I think you kind of. It's almost like you have to cast them in tandem, don't you?
Yes.
Or you have to know who you're going to cast as the Phantom to inform your choice, and vice versa with Christine. So, interestingly, the first person to be cast in this was actually Patrick Wilson.
Really?
He was the first one to be signed. Then Gerard Butler.
Okay.
And then Emmy Rossum.
Because I think I'd say I might have seen a very, very old making of video, but I think there was a bit of a search for Christine based on who they'd chosen.
Possibly. There might have been, almost not quite like.
Because she was pretty much unknown, wasn't she, when she?
Yeah, I think very much her first kind of major length feature film, or very much mainstream film, anyhow. So that actually kind of goes against what we're saying, where you've got to get the Phantom right first. They just went, well, let's get Raoul first.
Let's just go for the one that's just a bit.
And I think probably Patrick Wilson's singing ability and look probably got him that role. Obviously, I'm not saying that he's not a good performer, because he absolutely is. But obviously, the Raoul has to look like Prince Charming. Otherwise, again, it doesn't really. Well, I suppose it kind of does work if they're childhood friends, but generally speaking, you have to look a little bit, Prince Charming.
Yeah, you want your audience to want that person and want to be able to fall in love with them, even if you did hate his wig.
Yeah, he just looks silly.
I thought he was an alright,
It wasn't. It looked silly.
No.
Throughout the whole thing, the only thing I could think of was salt your hair, mate. It looks silly. That's all I could. Salt the barnet out, and then you'll be all right.
I thought it was quite nice. I'd have run my fingers through his luscious locks, but there we go.
Well, that says more about you than anything. So, interestingly, obviously, we spoke about the relationship between Joel Schumacher and Andrew Lloyd Webber, but one thing that was quite interesting is that one of the things that actually made Andrew Lloyd Webber go in the direction of Joel Schumacher was The Lost Boys, which I suppose you can see the links. There's that kind of gothic element to it.
That one I have seen, haven't I?
Yeah, yes. That was, that's the vampire one.
Yeah. Did I fall asleep? I think I might have done.
You did. But the reason Joel Schumacher was first kind of considered was because of his use of music in The Lost Boys. And actually, that's a really kind of good thing. That opening shot from The Lost Boys, where it goes over that, I think it's over the lake or over the ocean, and you've got that Lost Boys song. Cry, little sister, thou shalt. Yeah, that bit. That, straight away, that's a very good use of music. And I think, obviously, if you're going to do a musical, you have to know how to use music in film. And I think that's obviously a very, very kind of important thing. So one thing I was thinking about actually when we were watching this last night is how musicals, on stage, obviously performers get limited runs in those roles, so every kind of 6 months, year, or however long, they change the roles of who's playing who, and things like that. So with that in mind, if there was a 2024 musical version of The Phantom of the Opera in film, have you got any ideas of who you might cast? Because there was one point where I was like, I know who I'd cast in the role of Minnie Driver's character, Carlotta.
Okay, give me who you'd cast as that then first.
So I would cast Lady Gaga in that role.
Oh yeah, that would be good.
Because I think obviously she's got the vocal chops, but I can see her doing that kind of that character. Because I think Minnie Driver is great in this. I think her performance, as obviously she's not singing, as we know, but her performance and her characterization is really, really funny. And it's actually to the point where we kind of don't mind that, she's getting kicked out because she's a bit of a diva, isn't she? So I would cast Lady Gaga in that role.
Is that stemming from obviously what we've seen in the trailers for the new Joker film? Do you think?
There's elements of that. I think it's also, she has that kind of larger than life kind of personality. I think we've seen from her music career. So I would kind of cast her in that role. I'm still a little bit on the Phantom. For some reason, there's only one name that I keep coming back to. And I don't know how you feel about this because I know you're not a fan of his vocals.
Okay.
But Hugh Jackman,
no.
I can very easily see Hugh Jackman in this role. As I say, he has a very distinctive singing voice, a lot of vibrato in there. But I'm looking at it more from going back, and this is a bit of a strange link, but his work in The Prestige, which and everybody who's ever spoken to me ever knows is my favourite film ever. His work in that is there's a duality to his performance. And I think that can be really good for that kind of points where you're frightened by Hugh Jackman, but there are those tender moments where you see that torment and that trauma and you feel sorry for him and you want to love him, and then it switches and all of a sudden he's just this horrible kind of character. So I could see Hugh Jackman in there.
Okay. Well, it's funny you brought up this Prestige, actually, because now that's kind of just triggered something in my mind. But I'm like, oh, Christian Bale, because he can sing.
Well, yeah, he's done Newsies and that, hasn't he? Yeah. To be fair, Christian Bale has said he would never star in another musical again. So either a lot of money or some kind of divine intervention.
Crippling wasting disease that he needs the money.
I could see Christian Bale, again, very similar from The Prestige. I can see that. I can certainly see those terrifying moments in there. Is there anybody else that you've perhaps thought about, or have I just put you too much on the spot?
I don't know. Say there is a name, but I'm not going to bring it up in this because I know that.
Is it because it's controversial?
Yeah, and I'm not going to bring it up.
Yeah.
So I'm going to gloss over that one. But yeah, that would be an interesting choice. But it's a tough one because and again, I think because it has been made and I like this version of the film, it's hard for me even now to put like someone else into it 20 odd years later. And my brain is also forgetting every single actor's name that I could ever think of.
I have a name for Raoul.
Okay.
But only in about 5-10 years.
Okay.
I could see, and this is going to make you quite happy, but I can see a Timothée Chalamet there.
Okay.
Like he is almost that kind of, he's the sort of person who, if you brought him home to your mum would be fairly happy because he's not going to hurt you. He seems like a nice guy, you know. He doesn't seem like he doesn't seem dangerous in any way. And I think that's kind of quite important for the role of Raoul. He has to seem safe, doesn't he?
Yeah.
He can't be a role where you're questioning his intentions or anything like that, because that's very much what's happening with the Phantom. So,
I've just thought of a really good Phantom one. But yeah, going back to Timmy.
He's Timmy. You don't know this person. It's Timothée Chalamet.
Timothée Chalamet. But I don't know. The problem is I think I can't picture Timothée Chalamet at the moment, 5 or 10 years older. That kind of scares me slightly because I love him as he is now, and I don't know what his career or who he will be when he is 5 or 10 years older. Like I can't picture him in films at the moment.
I only kind of say that because I think. In his current state, I think he's a little bit young.
Yeah. Oh, hell yeah.
You know.
So who the hell would you put as Christine?
Well, again, if you were to put somebody of equal age, and yes, that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Because that's actually something that's quite kind of, again, not really. Don't think too much about it, because obviously Patrick Wilson is definitely in his mid-30s at this time, and Emmy Rosen is young. Yeah, so he kind of gets away with it, but. Yeah, so that, that's a role that I could see there. Christine, I haven't really got anybody in mind, really.
No, not.
I suppose a name that I could put there, but I don't know about singing ability. All of these kind of forget about singing ability for a minute, just from a filmmaking kind of perspective. I suppose I could see a Jenna Ortega in there.
Yeah, she did kind of pop up in my mind a little bit, but again, is it just because she's around at the moment that
Possibly.
she's kind of popping
She's quite prevalent in everybody's minds, that kind of thing.
But I don't know whether she would work. No. So I don't know if you've seen the new Sabrina Carter music video that she's in, where they're like killing each other. But yeah, it's just a different kind of realm. But no, going back to the Phantom, one that popped up into my head was Henry Cavill. Or is that too controversial?
No. Yeah, I can see that.
It's not as controversial as my other choice.
No, well, yeah. I don't even think Henry Cavill is.
No, he's not, is he? He just got dropped, didn't he? From
Oh, yeah. DC kind of like ruined him a little bit. I can definitely see that. I can definitely see a lot of women liking that.
Oh, hell
naturally. Yeah, I can definitely see that. I have just had a thought of somebody who could play either Simon Callow or who could have played Simon Callow or Kieran Hines' character. Not that either of them are bad in it, because they're not. But somebody I would have liked to have seen in that, just for a more comedy kind of perspective. I'd have liked to have seen like a Rick Mail in that role.
Yeah.
And obviously we know he can do a bit of the singing because he was Herod in Jesus Christ Superstar, or a version of that. I don't know which version.
I don't know
he was in a version. So yeah, Rick Mail in that kind of role. I mean, if you really want to push it, you can then have Aid Edmonds.
I was just thinking
in the other role,
literally just like,
but then it would be a little bit. Yeah, it would just be like a kind of version of a bottom episode, wouldn't it?
But I kind of like that. I kind of, because I suppose there is an element of Phantom where, especially those parts and Carlotta's part, they are a little bit panto. They are just that kind of they are, as you say, the light relief to the main story and the main people that are in it. But yeah, I think that would have been quite funny, actually.
And one name for, I'm going to have, is it Madame Geary?
Madame Giry.
Madame Giry, I do apologise. That's what I mean about snobbery. Like, I can't pronounce the name, it's fine. Don't worry about it. I can see like an Olivia Colman in that role.
Yeah.
You know?
Yes.
So
that would be very good.
So yeah, I think we've got some.
Or you could, we say it's probably a bit too old now, but you could go better in the older part, not so better in the bit where it is actually Raoul remembering.
In her younger days.
Yeah, but what's her name? Professor McGonagall.
Oh, Maggie Smith.
Yeah, Maggie Smith. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely in her older days. It's very difficult to see Maggie Smith.
Yeah.
For people of a certain age, for anybody, she I can't.
She is just like 75, 80. Yeah, she's never anything else now. It's just weird.
Obviously for people of a certain age, because others who are perhaps a little bit older will know her from other things. But for certainly our generation, she is Professor McGonagall.
Yeah, she's nothing else. Yeah.
So yes, I think we could have cast a pretty decent.
I think it could have been interesting.
Phantom of the Opera interpretation. So I think that brings us on quite nicely to further watching.
Mm-hmm.
So for fans of this film, what would we suggest? So I think if you do love the story of the Phantom of the Opera, I think some obviously very clear recommendations would be the 1920s version of the Phantom of the Opera.
Mm-hmm.
There's a 1989 version with Robert Englund, as I mentioned earlier, which is certainly worth a watch. It's not a particularly great film, but it's worth a watch. For lovers of the stage show, Love Never Dies as well, and also the stage show. I know it's not running in the West End at the moment.
No.
But if it happens to, be brought back again, or an amateur production of it anywhere, if at any point, go and watch it, because I think it's one of those things you have to go and watch at least once.
Yeah,
before we started going to musicals on a regular basis, that was the one that was like, I've really got to go and see that. I think that's kind of, for a lot of people, that's the kind of thing. For me, for those kind of more kind of gothic elements of it, I think the 1930s Dracula is a good shout.
Mm-hmm.
Has similar kind of tone to it and a similar kind of aesthetic to it. And then finally I've got Moulin Rouge.
Okay.
I think that's again a very, it's sort of late 18th century, early 19th century Paris.
And it's got that way of it's made much grander by the film and the
that was a film before it was a musical, wasn't it? Yeah. Obviously that's Baz Luhrmann, so it looks amazing. And I think as well, if you're not perhaps totally 100% into musicals, but you like that kind of era and you like that kind of that setting, I think Moulin Rouge is perhaps a good one to go for to begin with, because it has, popular songs in there that, if you're not into musicals, sometimes the phrasing of musical songs can be a bit odd for listeners of more popular music, whereas obviously Moulin Rouge has just, popular songs in there.
The stage show has popular songs in it.
Yeah, but so does the film.
Does it? I haven't watched it in ages, to be honest.
Yeah.
Oh, it's got a few, isn't it? But the stage show's got even.
It's got Ewan McGregor singing your song.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Green or the blue. Yeah, that's all I hear when I think of that.
Him.
But do you have any further watching to add to that?
Well, there is a film that kind of comes to mind, and again, it's probably no one will know it because it is very much.
We have some avid film fans on here.
We do, but I don't know whether this is going too much left field. But there's a film called Gypsy 83, which again, you're looking at me going,
never heard
what
of
the
that
hell
film.
is that? It's basically, it's linking, this woman that's in it is like obsessed with Stevie Nicks. But it's kind of that thing of, it's that element of the floaty dresses and the spinning around and that sort of whimsical Stevie Nicks sort of way. And I don't know, that would just kind of popped into my head. And it's got that gothic element as well, because she's quite kind of gothic, and so is her friend. But yeah, it's a film that probably I would have thought no one has probably heard listening to this podcast. But go and watch it. It's an interesting film. It's quite a sweet film. But yeah, I think I'd say I don't know about other ones though, because again, I'm not very film knowledgeable, shall we say. I'll happily enjoy a film, but I'm not very good at the whole I'm going to marry it up with this one because I think that makes sense. And
well, I think the ones that we've both mentioned, so Gypsy 83 and Moulin Rouge, Dracula, and other versions of the Phantom, are definitely a good place to start. So, in closing, if you had to review this film in one sentence, what would your review be? Or would you like me to go first?
You go first, and I'll have a think.
So, I would describe this film and review this film as a film that homages musicals without ruining film.
Ooh, I like that.
So what I mean by that is that sometimes the first thing that people focus on with a musical, like Mamma Mia, like a Cats, is getting the music right. And as a result, sometimes the filmmaking aspects aren't there or they're lost slightly. Whereas I think this marries those two genres really, really well. And that, first and foremost, this is a film. It just happens to be based on a very popular stage show.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's quite good.
That's kind of where I think this film holds up, is that it's a film.
Yeah.
Yeah,
if you almost didn't know that there was a musical, you'd never seen the musical, it lives up as a film in its own right.
The best way to describe it for me is you could take the music out of it and the story wouldn't be lost.
Yeah, no, I think, you say you could almost do the songs as dialogue, shall we say, and it could work just as well. Absolutely, I think that's quite a good analogy. I like.
How about this? Have I put you on the spot?
I'm not great with words, but
okay, then make it slightly easier for you. If you were to give this anything from 1 to 5 stars, what would you give it?
I'd probably give it a 4.
4 stars. So it's got Hannah's endorsement.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's always good.
But then I suppose actually, no, it's not the case of any musical film will have my endorsement, because they really blooming don't. But I do really like this one, and it definitely does hold a special place in my heart. And I just think it's a good film. It's got good characters in it. The music's obviously amazing. That initial blooming chord, as soon as the chandelier illuminates, will forever make me sob whenever I see it live, because it just blows my mind every time. And it's just, has a real...
So does this film, does that give you the same sort of feel?
No.
Okay.
And it was really tough, because there was times where I was, I suppose, almost trying to make myself feel like I feel when I watch the musical. And it may well be that it is different choices in the film that have been done that make me feel different. So like there was points where like the Masquerade is slightly different, how they like the dancing's different in the film versus the stage show, and there's the costume that the Phantom comes into the Masquerade ball in is completely different, and I think absolutely pants in the film versus what's in the stage show. It's so much more grand and menacing. It's like this skull, kind of harboring back to when he stamps his notes that he gives to everyone. It's a skull, and that's what he's wearing when he enters the Masquerade and then starts going off on one and presenting his new opera. But again, I realise why that is. It's because it's on stage. You need to be able to see that from further back in the audience and it have more of a grand effect. So I get why they didn't have it in the film as such. But yeah, his Peasley little skeleton mask that he has just really angers me in this film.
But even considering that, 4 stars is a pretty good endorsement of this film.
I do agree. I'd agree. Absolutely. There's not anything I drastically hate. It's just little tweaks. And again, you mentioned CGI. There's one bit that is purely done with like a trap door and a bit of pyro that goes off, whereas in the film they did it with like fake flames and CGI, and I was just like, it kind of ruins it for me slightly, because it's actually more, I think, shocking and effective when it's a trapdoor and then some pyro goes off and they're gone. I don't know, just maybe that's just me. Maybe it's a bit. There's some bits that are a bit too filmy, but other bits I'm like, ooh, that's good filming.
I think probably what we can leave with our listeners is this works on its own accord, but obviously if you've seen the musical, then it will give you a different perspective on things.
Absolutely, I agree.
So if you haven't already, if there's an opportunity to, in some facet, if it's ever brought back, go and see the stage show. But in the meantime, this is a good replacement.
Yeah, well, the stage show's still on. Phantom's still running in the West End.
Is it?
Yeah.
I thought it was.
No, Phantom.
Oh, it was gonna end, wasn't it? And then they brought it back.
Yeah.
So yeah, with that in mind, then,
I think it stopped playing for a couple of days because they changed the name of the theatre or something.
With that in mind, then go and see the stage show. But if you can't afford it or you can't get there, then pick up the DVD and watch this version. It's a really good kind of placeholder for the stage show.
Absolutely.
Visit the Michael Caine Tangerine Emporium for all your citrus fruit needs. Visit us in-store to peruse our limitless supply of Burmese citrus fruits, plus browse our selection of Lunchables. Or shop online using discount code I Bloody Told You to receive a 10% discount on our lean, mean tangerine machine for all your juicing needs. That's the Michael Caine Tangerine Emporium, Bond Street, London, England. We have tangerines the size of rubies.
Unfortunately, it's come to that time in the episode where myself, Hannah and Jimmy have to say goodbye. We hope you've enjoyed listening to the episode as much as we've enjoyed putting it together for you. Don't forget to like and subscribe to wherever you get your podcasts from, and also head over to our social media platforms to stay up to date. We thank you for listening to myself, Jimmy and Hannah. Together, we are Bury Our Bones with Cinema. And it will be a one-button job. Boom, 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 toom, toom, toom.
I have a terrible tendency to just scroll about and if you're talking, when we're doing it, I still find it slightly distracting.
It's a bit weird, but I think it's a bit weird, but I suppose...
maybe if you listen to it back, see if it sounds... I was like, I'm going to have to stop it. You listen to it back,
It's a good job I observed that well, wasn't it?